Now, there are a lot of liberals, a lot of the lefties in the party who think that this is a huge mistake. You don't. Why?
Well, first, I want to make sure that I very much respect them and their opinion. This is a very tough one after 8 years of a war that we were doing very well at, and then we went to that tragic misadventure in Iraq. But here's why I differ and support the president in this. Is for me, it's no longer about Afghanistan. For me, it's that third issue he talked about, the partnership with Pakistan, where there is a safe haven of al-Qaeda that is sitting there in a country that for a year and a half we've been being briefed is close to a failed state because of the radical Taliban and others that reside there. If that state goes under, with that safe haven there, I'm not as concerned about the nuclear weapons as I am about the 2,000 scientists that are in their nuclear weapons program, graduates of the most radical of universities in Pakistan with access to the knowledge to make bombs and or have access to actual radioactive material, then the cost and consequences are much greater in this global war of terror than taking the opportunity, a closing window of opportunity to eradicate that safe haven. As far as Afghanistan, I think there's a bit too much reliance upon a corrupt, inept government. The key line for me in the speech in this case was that we will rely increasingly, or he didn't say increasingly, but rely upon local provincial governors or warlords or others, because we have to keep in mind that Taliban in Afghanistan number 20,000, of which 70% are there, according to the CIA, for a wage, not because of ideology. That's why I believe this is an opportunity at less cost, rather than not partnering with Pakistan against a threat where they could, in a safe haven, plan against us. At best and at worst, they can also plan against us once they have access to radioactive material.
But, Congressman, at the same time, we saw this years ago when A.Q. Khan was rolling out technology to the North Koreans, to the Iranians, and others, too. You're aware of this information. This has happened, but that's not just it. As a former CIA guy, the Pakistani ISI fundamentally involved in helping to prop up the Taliban in the first place. Mm-hmm. We're dropping 100,000 troops into Afghanistan, where we have a corrupt and incompetent regime in Karzai, and yet you're telling me that the real issue is Pakistan. Why am I dropping 100,000 troops in Afghanistan? That makes no sense at all.
Right. I am saying that in fact, I thought the president emphasized too much Karzai. How can we even put our national security interest in such an inept, corrupt government? No, it is about Pakistan, and our being on the other side of that border militarily is one where there are 35,000 Taliban, which they harbor the leadership of the 20,000 Taliban in Afghanistan. 35,000 are in Pakistan. They go back and forth across that border. If Pakistan is alone in this, if we are not there to so to speak, close down that border,
but we're not.
If we are not there in a pincher movement,
yeah, but Congressman, but we are not doing it just for that reason. As I understand this, though, and again, I'm leaving for Kandahar and Kabul tomorrow. What I'm hearing is that a lot of these troops are going into Helmand province. Some will go into Kandahar province, which could go through Spin Boldak into Quetta. I understand they could go to the east of Kabul as well. You can go along the Pakistani border, but we're not talking about sending an additional 30,000 troops to seal this border. We're talking about sending in 30,000 more troops, bringing it to 100,000 plus 30,000+ NATO troops to stabilize Afghanistan. That is not the same thing that you're telling me here.
No. What I am telling you is the primary purpose, and the president said this last March, was al-Qaeda, and he reemphasized it last night. There are no al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. There's none. They're all, several hundred of them, in Pakistan. That's our objective. And the objective is this partnership with Pakistan to know that we're on the other side of the border, not literally closing down the border, but taking stability ops in terms of making sure that the local entities that we leave behind in Afghanistan will not be hospitable once the al-Qaeda has been exterminated on the other side. Inhospitable, that is, to al-Qaeda ever resurrecting itself. I understand it's not a perfect classic pincher movement of us on one side and them on the other, but neither is, as you well know from your experience, this global war of terror. This is about Pakistan. And I agree with you, its intelligence and even its army that have tentacles into these radical elements, understanding that they're going to be hung by their people that they're supporting if they don't turn against these radical elements. Look, I know it isn't the best of strategies, but my assessment, and Jack, I respect what you're saying, is that trying to do this from a distance, leaving behind the leadership of al-Qaeda in the most inhospitable of regions, welcomed by radical elements, will never have Pakistan pursue them if we are absent. And this is our security against them. It's not about Afghanistan's security any longer.
Representative Joe Sestak, again, Democrat out of Pennsylvania, is my guest. One of the interesting aspects of this, and by the way, I was terribly concerned, Congressman, that I actually agreed with John McCain on this issue. I mean, it actually petrified me a little bit, I'll be honest.
How he spoke on it?
When President Obama said, we're going to have an end date where we'll start bringing troops out in July of 2011,
yes.
You know what I thought to myself? I thought, you know what? Perfect. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm Taliban. I go chill out in my house someplace until August of 2011, and then all hell breaks loose. I mean, to me, it's not even about setting a date. And if that's the case, it seems to me if that's not a political ploy by this president, and I like this guy, I do.
Right.
I think it's a political ploy. I think it's weak. I think it undermines the entire policy. It makes it even worse than it was before, in my mind.
Jack, on this one, although I wouldn't go into a stronger tone, you and I agree.
So you and I agree with John McCain?
You and I do. I just off for representatives and talking about this. My press release last night said I agree with what the president's doing and this and this and this, but I said he should not have used a timetable. He should have used benchmarks of success and failure, which could trigger an exit strategy for success or trigger an alternative, even an exit strategy for an alternative strategy for failure of cost and benefit. You know as well as I do in your business, you weigh cost and benefits. That comes from benchmarks. And if you cannot provide us what the benchmarks are for these additional troops, how can you tell us you're going to measure success? You don't get that by that date. And I understand why he did it. Maybe some politics in it, or he felt he had to show to Afghan it wasn't open-ended commitment. But my point is, it's not about Afghanistan. It's about al-Qaeda on the other side of the border, and he said that's our objective, and I wish he hadn't had that, as you said, in that speech. I agree, and my press release said it.
If we look now to the future, and you mentioned that this is about how this impacts us, at the same time, the Afghanis are listening to this story. And if we're saying, you know what, we want you to step up, my attitude is, wait a second, why, if I'm Afghani and I'm trying to decide how I'm going to take care of myself, take care of my family, why would I stand behind the Americans? I'll be honest. Well, I wouldn't. There was no way in hell I would do that if I know full on that the Americans are going to start pulling out in July of 2011 and the Taliban's going to start rolling back in August. I wouldn't do it. It doesn't make any sense.
I looked in that speech again, and I refound the phrase, conditions on the ground will matter. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff just said to Senator McCain about an hour or two ago at the Sestak hearing that date is not firm. I just wish that you had said the same, because that country, as well as Pakistan, remember when we walked away from them before. And although they promised them a strategic relationship, if that line had been in there, I was supportive of the whole of the cloth of this presentation. All that said, Jack, I believe that this is probably the most important speech he's made, because this war, and you know I was on the ground for a short period of time at the beginning of it as I headed the Navy's anti-terrorism unit. Actually, I flew in with someone from the CIA, and we were doing it right at the beginning, in the sense of having provided an edifice of security by which the other elements of our power, the rule of law, the rule of education, et cetera, could come in and at a de minimis cost, relative de minimis cost, leave behind a society which would not welcome back al-Qaeda. But that tragic misadventure in Iraq took us away. And the last administration, and we have to keep this in mind, when the chairman said 2 years ago of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in Iraq we do what we must, in Afghanistan we do what we can. No. This president was handed a very weak hand, and within that hand, however, was that one joker we just can't afford, which is a safe haven of al-Qaeda in Pakistan, and that's why I am supportive of this overall effort. I just cannot bet on the come that they will be there not in a failed state of Pakistan if we just stay status quo or withdraw at this moment. And we need benchmarks that trigger the appropriate exit strategy, however, and we are missing that. I'm sending a letter, actually, tomorrow, for composing it today, asking where they were, because we were promised these back in March in the first escalation and never got them.
Let me ask you one political question. Let me take you forward, and this is a hypothetical, so please play along if you can. It's 2011, and things are not going well. We're still dropping the, $30 billion a year plus that this is going to spend, according to the president. And that's not even talking about Afghanistan. We still have unemployment at in excess of 10%. How dangerous is this for President Obama? How dangerous is this for control of both the House and the Senate for the Democrats? I think it's a disaster, but I'm asking you.
No, I have to agree. Politically, this may end up being a disaster, but you and I both served in respective services where we know in decisions like this, consequences of politics should never be included. It's sort of like Scoop Jackson used to say, Senator Scoop Jackson, when issues of national security comes up, the best politics is no politics. I mean, look in my own primary in the state of Pennsylvania. This isn't necessarily an attractive position to have that I'm taking, but I believe in it strongly, and I'm taking it on the merits of what my experience has shown and what I believe. My take on this, however, is we have seen other issues where Lebanon for Reagan, Somalia for President Clinton, where a withdrawal occurred, and they survived it. It depends upon whether we're upfront with the public, and now we don't have that yet in the benchmarks to show we're measuring that success. For example, we came out with a wonderful speech of the president's in the first increase of troops in March, but yet it was then on the back burner. We didn't have one Democratic caucus on it this year.
But Congressman, wait a second.
Until we had one,
but what you're telling me
came in a couple weeks ago. Yeah, it shouldn't have been on the back burner.
Yeah, but what you're telling me is then that this president really isn't being honest with the American people on this withdrawal. Because, I mean, based upon what he did, I don't think that he has been. I did not see that.
Here's what I would not characterize this word at all with this man as dishonest. He is truly, I believe, an honest man of great integrity. I think the issue is this. I think it's almost a bureaucracy at times. Let me give you an example. Today at the Senate Armed Services Committee, you had Senator Levin ask Secretary Gates, where's the benchmarks that we were supposed to receive some time ago? He said, well, we provided them to you. He said, no. You did provide some draft, but you said you were going to give us the final ones in September. And so my take on it is, the president is on the higher ground trying to emphasize this. I think those who are supporting him, and you and I have lived in those bureaucracies, they may be having a hard time coming up with them. And if they are, then that should give hesitation to this strategy. Because how do you say that we need X amount of troops if you can't say that you know that's needed because this benchmark and this benchmark have to be achieved? And if they can't produce it, then they're the ones that are being disingenuous with the public. And I feel this president's strength is if he, and that's why I'm sending the letter, recognizes that, hey, when you have a challenge, even like this economic stimulus bill, instead of selling it, it's going to get 8% unemployment, let the crew of the ship know you're in a storm and it's going to be tough slogging for a while. And I think they need to do that with these benchmarks, too.